Good evening, everybody. We've got venture capitalist up for the start, so this is one that I have chat to thank for. Actually, I'd seen it on the free to play part of the Steam store for quite some time, and I was partially interested. Like it's a eye-catching title, it's a neat little idea, but I'd never actually jumped in and given the game a try. So after the last stream where somebody had brought this up, I actually went out to take a look at it and really played it. I played it out, and I wound up getting hooked in. So I've been playing a game for a while, and what I'm going to be doing just after this little introduction is I'll be starting a brand new playthrough, basically selling my shares and restarting. One of the mechanics in this game is over your lifetime earnings, you'll be attracting angel investors. And so in order to take advantage of these angel investors, you need to basically start the game over again. But what the angel investors will do, it's, a little bit like you would expect from quote-unquote real life. For some reason, Twitch really wants me to play an ad, so there's probably going to be there's probably going to be a little bit of delay while my bandwidth tries to handle this. But that's fine, because I've got a little bit of warm-up to do. But yeah, so basically, if you've demonstrated yourself as somebody who can, quote-unquote, create value, as the jargon of these people tends to be, then you're going to have more people running in trying to to put their capital to work. Hey, Kite, how's it going? I'm sorry, guys. I should have eaten before I started streaming. I'm just going to take a bite of my sandwich and then I'll put it away. Okay, that should tide me over. So yeah, a little bit like what you would expect. People with good ideas or an established track record as far as, the ability to operate in business attract people who want to see their money go further. Like, if I carry, let's go crazy, let's just say a straight $1 billion in my back pocket, that's not actually going to make any money. That represents a loss or a lack of those use of resources on my part. What I want to do with that money is I want to put it towards things that will hopefully make me more. Generally, the way that people do that is to make businesses or to invest in existing businesses, and so that's what these angel investors are going to do. Clearly, you want the highest return that you can get, so you'd be more inclined to invest with somebody who either has something that's a really good idea or somebody who's demonstrated that they're able to make more money than what you put in. Thanks. Yeah, I am taking a little bit of advantage of the fact that there wasn't anybody in the chat when I got my sandwich, but that's all good. Yeah, I'm doing all right, Kite. I got a late start tonight. That was mostly just because I sort of mismanaged my sleeping schedule a little bit. So I sort of took a nap, and then I got up and found out it was a couple of hours past when I wanted to start the stream. So, just did a little bit of running around. Actually, if you'll bear with me for 1 second, I'm not going to do a proper break, but I do need to actually have one thing I need to get out of my mail, so I'm just going to get up for a quick second. It shouldn't be too long, but be with you a sec. Alright, sorry about that, guys. But yeah, so I basically got a later start to everything than I had been planning. But we're here now, so there's a little bit of a theme, as is indicated from the title here. I really wanted to go back to Dragonfall, but I thought I'd give that a little bit of a rest because we're actually going to have a lot of time to do that now that I'm out of school. I'll talk a little bit about school as well. But given the fact that somebody had indicated or had brought my attention to this really fun little game, I thought it would be neat to play it first of all. Oh. Yeah, sorry, just give me 1 second here, actually. I just need to I remembered that there was a bill due, and I can't remember if I've gone past the due date or something like that, but I just want to make sure that I pay that before I go any further. It's one of the drawbacks of falling asleep when you plan to do things during a day. But yeah, so I thought, like, the one problem with Adventure Capitalist is I don't think it's a game that really streams particularly well. It's a very simple game. It's a fun one, but it's not one that I would really say, you know, we're going to dedicate a few hours to this to this title. But I was going to talk a little bit about sort of the ideas going on behind this game, what it's fun. Some of the, I'll say, I guess for lack of a better term, some of the assumptions about how the world works that it's making, and just generally, you know, talk a little bit about what's going on. I mean, just, you know, for lack of a better term, do a little bit of an analysis on it, I suppose. And then we were going to move into another game that I think sort of fits that model. And I'm not sure how long I'll play. It might actually wind up being 3 games today, but I've got at least 2 on board. I'm going to keep my cards close to my chest as far as what the second game is. But once I pay my own bills, which it seems like it doesn't want me to do. Alright, just one more sec. Sorry, I did want to be a little more prepared in starting today, but it gives me a chance to let everybody come in and see the Adventure Capitalist. Okay. Now, as far as school is concerned, I have finished the thesis. It turns out there's a small, I won't even say hitch, but just in terms of the way that things are actually going to go for this, I am allowed to do revisions to it. So what that means is I do still have a week where I'm going to be doing some work on the thesis, but the nice thing about this is finals and all of that are complete. So I don't need to worry about things like, you know, classes or midterms or anything like that. Keep cards. Oh, credit card bill. I'm sorry, I'm losing my... I'm losing my train of thought in terms of what I was talking about. I had a credit card bill which I needed to pay, so that's always saying. All right, I've got a. So as far as the school stuff is concerned, I do have a little bit more work to do on the thesis, but nothing that should keep me from streaming. So. Monday is obviously one of my regular streaming days, and this is one of the Mondays where I'm actually following through in terms of having something to show. But I'm going to try to do some more stuff during the week, so long as my revisions are on track. So let's play Adventure Capitalist. I'm going to start from the very beginning, so in this case, I'm going to get a bonus from the Angels, but the start is going to be sort of the same as what it is. So we sell shares and restart. And I begin with $24.52 in this game. I can hire managers and things like that. I'll go from the very beginning and sort of talk about what's going on in this game. So you are not really a venture capitalist so much as you are just a straight up capitalist. The venture capitalists presumably are the people who are investing And you start with a lemonade stand. How do you get money out of this lemonade stand? Well, you click on it, and you generate money. Hey, Earth Bowser. Yes, Adventure Capitalist. Courtesy of the viewership. So, in this case, you know, this is effectively supposed to, as far as I can tell, this is basically sort of indicating how normal people will make their living, right? Either you make a business or you are, you know, you're working at a job as your, you know, for yourself. And you are exercising the labor. In this case, I'm just clicking a button to generate some money, and this is how you do it. I've already made $1,127. This is, well, I just reset my business, and so I have some angel investors. But I thought I was going to just kind of go over everything with the stream so we're on the same page, and maybe talk about some of the ideas that are going behind this game. Oh, keep my cards close to my chest. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. What I mean by that is just I think that's a poker saying, which is I don't really want anybody to know what's going on. There is going to be a second game tonight, but I thought I would keep that to myself until the time comes. So, but yeah, thanks everybody for showing up. I'm a little surprised at the numbers for Adventure Capitalist, which is a little bit of a more simple game, but welcome everyone. So yeah, I mean, effectively what this is the same as you working at a job or working at your own business. The money doesn't make a whole lot, and you have to put the effort in every day squeezing the lemons and making the lemon juice. Now, what I am going to start doing is I'm not even going to worry about the traditional managers. I'm actually going to take advantage of these angel investors. So in this case, I'm going to hire Jen Katzberger, which is a play on Jeffrey Katzenberger, who runs DreamWorks, or at least ran. 10% cheaper for 10% cheaper for movie studios, and it shows how much cash per second it generates. Darky McGrumpface, which will again reduce the cost of my banks and shows cash per second. Ebenezer Rockefeller, again, two famous misers. Oil company 10% cheaper and shows cash per second. And Selly Spike H. Connor unlocks the easy upgrader, a fine thing that all people need. I don't actually know how this thing works, but we'll see how it works. Now, I don't have any more angels, so I don't need to worry about these, and all this other stuff is really expensive. So Derek Plainview, I hope you guys have seen this, have seen There Will Be Blood. But he costs 100 billion, which I don't have right now. MM Boole, how's it going? Oh, the easy upgrader doesn't work? Fair enough. Now, what I was going to talk about was... Oh, it's a trap that gets me to murder an angel? Mission accomplished. Curious is the trap maker's art. Oh god, what does that line say? His efficacy unwitnessed by his own eyes. So, as tends to be the way with money, you can... Oh, I seem to be making... Oh yeah, it's because I gave up all my angels. So yeah, what you actually get from the lemonade stand is relatively small. I was making a lot more money because of my angel investors, which I just murdered. So I can keep working at this lemonade stand, squeezing lemons, but it's a whole lot easier to hire somebody to do that for me. So you notice now that the lemonade stand is just ticking away on its own. There are two things that you can do in Adventure Capitalist next, which is you can either invest in more lemonade stands, which in this case is going to cost me $4, or I can get a newspaper delivery service. I'll start with a newspaper delivery service because in this case this is something that I need to work on my own, and then I can buy more lemonade stands, or car wash in this case, which I'll just move up. But notice in this case, again, I need to expend the labor to generate money off of the newsstand, whereas the lemonade stand is sort of working on its own. Now, I can wait for 15,000 so I can get somebody to run the newspapers, but the other thing that can happen is I can just simply buy up some more lemonade stands and generate a little bit more money. And as you buy more businesses or buy more of the same business, the rate at which you get profits is going to increase. So one of the things that I dislike about the earlier levels of these upgrades are that they're a little bit faster. I don't like clicking as quickly. Or sorry, I don't like clicking so much on these, which is why I like hiring a lot of managers when I can. But the idea, I mean, the fun thing about this is you can sort of say this is a somewhat political game just because if you look at it, right, you go from somebody who's running a simple lemonade stand, and all of a sudden the forces of capitalism have got you to a point where you are buying more businesses, which is sort of the way that you would expect these things to work, right? You've got some money, and you're putting that money to work, but what you're also doing now is you're hiring managers, and so all of a sudden you're doing less work, and you're collecting more and more profit, and more of that profit is going into buying up more businesses, and it winds up... it basically just kind of winds up building on top of itself. And this is what you're going to be hearing quite a bit in terms of a lot of the discussion about income inequality, is that, you know, it's very hard to fail as a capitalist or something like that. Although I think there's an equal argument to say that the one of the greater virtues of at least the American system, and I think Canada to some extent, although I don't quite think I think there's some stigma associated with bankruptcy that maybe isn't necessarily there in the States. But basically, the fact that you have this ability to go bankrupt, that you have this ability to fail, means that the successes will pay off the failures. I'm going to hire more managers because I don't like working. I've got Walter White working at my car wash now. And let's get little umbrellas so that we can... Oh, I see what's happening. So the Easy Upgrader just tells me what the next thing I can buy is. That's a not very helpful tool. But yeah, so you can notice here, like, all of a sudden I'm not running a lemonade stand anymore. I'm occasionally stepping in to click on my pizza joint and get it to do some work, but now I'm starting to make quite a fair amount of money. And as you will expect, this stuff sort of builds on itself and builds on itself. I think I'll try and invest a little bit in my existing businesses. So I definitely put a bit of a priority in terms of the kinds of businesses that have managers, just because in the end the advantage of having somebody to work it for me is a little too good to pass up. Because I can get more lemons. Doesn't seem to be much of a reason there, but I have a point I really like hitting on the lemonade stand, which is just when it becomes a constant stream of cash. So I can buy an upgrade, but again, I'm going to get another manager. You're doing great. Keep on biggering, my good fellow. Oh, I get it. So it's telling me don't bother with individuals anymore. Just buy more. Buy them in groups. One of the things about upgrades that I tend to find, like I try to get upgrades as quickly as I can, mostly so I can just get the cash right away, and it actually does give me a little bit of an incentive to put a lot more money into these. Now, the reason why I'm not actually clicking any of these buttons, although I will do upgrades just for the sake of discussion, is to give you a little bit of an indication in terms of where this falls down, like or not falls down, but like sort of where some of the reasoning or some of the assumptions that people make fall down. Like if I just sit on the cash, I don't actually generate any more. The whole way that this game becomes these absolutely comically large amounts of... basically become these like comical amounts of wealth that you generate are when you actually take that money and you put them into buying new businesses. If you just sit on it, if you do what's the Scrooge route, then you don't actually make anything. Now, usually what you'll get when you have a figure like the Miser is this is going to be somebody who... usually what you you get when you have somebody who is a bit of a miser is they'll put the money in the bank. Now, in the end, what the bank is just ultimately going to do is find things to invest in and make that money grow themselves, right? So the forces of capitalism ultimately wind up working just through a different means. An octillionaire, yeah. Pretty sure none of what. Yeah, there's definitely no octillionaires in the real world. I don't even think governments count as that. I'm just finishing off my sandwich. Bear with me a second. All right, sorry about that. So, I mean, the thing that kind of appeals to me about this game is you get to see how this is working, right? So we did one other extension into the real world, which is to say, let's say this good fellow, the adventure capitalist, doesn't know what he's going to do with all of his money, and he puts it into the bank. Well, again, the bank is just basically going to do the same thing with it. It's going to be a mortgage, or it's going to be a small business that gets invested in. But basically, this money's going to go somewhere. And I think probably some of the questions that people have when it comes to, analyzing the situation from the top down is, quote unquote, is it right? Is what's going on the way that society should be organized or what have you. Now, I don't actually necessarily think this is a question that I can entirely answer for people. I think part of this is, something that everybody kind of needs to decide on their own. But one of the things that sometimes maybe gets missed in a lot of these discussions tends to be the idea that there is sort of a fixed amount of wealth that that's going around, right? That we've got, an octillion dollars if we're like Frater 5. And what we're all deciding is whether or not, who gets how much of that octillion. And that's actually not the way that it works. The idea here is, so if I'm playing the adventure capitalist, now, again, this doesn't answer the question as to whether or not it's right that the adventure capitalist is actually doing anything worthwhile. One of the funny things about this game is every business that you buy is successful. It will always generate irregular amounts of money. Oil derricks? Well, I gotta buy one eventually, but I'm not at 25 billion yet. But, just this idea, again, I think a lot of people have a problem with the idea of somebody who's maybe not, working in the traditional sense. They're not, taking a shovel. Why is it that they're the one who's making all of the money? Now, one thing that's going on in this game is the businesses are successful ones that are actually employing people. And in this case, it is actually a meaningful contribution that somebody's making, in this case, to be able to organize basically this. In this case, we've got an arrangement of businesses, but ultimately assign that money to activities that people want. In the end, these businesses aren't going to succeed unless they're providing some service that somebody wants, right? Somebody wants lemonade, somebody wants a newspaper, somebody wants their car washed, somebody wants to watch a hockey game. And so one of the rewards to getting that determination right, being able to connect somebody with, basically connect a good with a potential customer for it, is actually something that we do assign a fairly high value on, and that is because ultimately the constraint that we face isn't necessarily that we have an octillion dollars that we're trying to divide amongst ourselves, but rather we have a finite set of resources on the planet. And this is like, even if we were to go aside from, environmental concerns, which I actually think are really relevant ones and ones we should probably be discussing, it can come straight down to things like how much time you have in a week, right? If I have got somebody like, Steve Jobs, let's say, do I want him spending that time manning the cashier at an Apple store? Or do I want him in meetings deciding what the next generation of smartphone is going to look like? So the rewards for getting that formulation right, making sure that you generate an iPhone as opposed to, Apple's earlier PDA, the Newton, is sort of where this reward comes in, and where you get all of this money. So again, it's kind of, I sort of lost my... I won't say I lost my train of thought, but I lost my way in that description a little bit. But that's a little bit of sort of what seems to be guiding the story of this game, sort of the way that it's shaped itself. There was another thing I was meaning to say about... Oh, right. I was talking a little bit about the inequality issue. So one of the things that really caught people's attention for some reason was a book by Thomas Piketty called Capital. Now I say for some reason, like there's a very clear reason why this book became such a big deal, and this is because we are in a time when you've got movements like Occupy Wall Street. People are very frustrated with the wealth distribution, and again, I intend to... What's the succession law? My son gets everything. Or alternatively, I generate so much money that I'm able to find a way of living forever. And I don't need to worry about succession laws. I mean, actually, on that note, Freighter 5, it's notable that many of our... our capitalist leaders, if you will, are actually donating so much of their money. You've got Bill Gates, you've got Warren Buffett, you've got Tim Cook. All of these people are pledging to, in some cases, some of them are pledging to have their entire wealth distributed to charitable causes within their lifetimes. So... Now, I mean, with that in mind, there's also lots of families, either in the States or, or in Europe, that, that are just this inherited wealth that have been passed down from generation to generation. So you can't always, I'm using examples of people who are quite charitable, but that's not always the case. But one of the things, when it comes down to the question of income inequality, like obviously this guy is making a bunch of money in this game, right? So what is... I guess the question is, what is stopping it? Where do people start to have a problem with the way that the system is working? Why does Occupy Wall Street come up? Other than, of course, obviously everybody would like more money, right? And if you see... one segment of people making a lot of money. By the way, I haven't worked out a specific system in terms of what to invest money in. What you'll notice here is I'm just basically putting that money to work as quickly as I can, because I'm going to get these big jumps of money in terms of like 200 million, 115 million from these. So I'm basically just trying to put the money to work as quickly as I can. Everything that stays up here is money that isn't earning me a return. so I try to avoid that. Now, I mean, I talk with my friend quite a bit about these issues, because he would say himself he is definitely a socialist, and he dislikes the idea of income inequality in and of itself, that it's not right that there be such a divide in wealth. I'm maybe not as bothered by the question of inequality in and of itself, so long as people's needs are taken care of. So a good example of this would be in my honors class, when somebody was suggesting their thesis. He wanted to deal with this idea of inequality. And the measure that I'm trying to remember exactly what it was. The measure that he used for yes, actually, specifically his thesis was going to be about poverty, and his specific measure of poverty was the proportion of the population that was below some... It was a proportion of the population below some threshold, like it was an average or something like that. Now, the objection that I raised in the class when he was giving that presentation, I mean, it's encouraged, right? I sound like a complete jerk when I say that, this guy is going and giving his presentation, and I raise an objection. But this is exactly the environment that you want for a thesis proposal. Is you do not want these unchecked assumptions to go by, because that means either you're not making a very meaningful contribution to your field of study, because somebody else will just raise that objection later. You want to make sure that you're talking about the real world if you can. So the problem that I had with his sort of definition of poverty or inequality or something like that was that if he's talking about a proportion of the population that falls under a certain threshold, and again, I'll just say like the average income or something like that, you're effectively saying that poverty will exist in his case in Canada, where I'm studying, where I live. But I mean, this could apply as well. If you were to write the same paper in the United States, you're effectively saying that no matter how wealthy the country gets, and this could be like across the board, the amount of wealth, not just money, but like actual wealth, the ability to buy goods and services has... I'm a social democrat, ask you anything. The problem that I have with that is that you could have this above, like, so we'll get aside any concerns about inflation or something like that. If I took everybody in the country's ability to obtain goods and services from each other and from the rest of the world, and I doubled that, the poverty would not change for that paper. And I have a problem with that because, the topic that I was dealing with was drone strikes in Pakistan, and the analysis of conflict from an economics point of view tends to be something that falls into the into development literature. So this would mean, people who are studying emerging markets, developing countries. Once upon a time they were called third world countries. But basically, you have these places where genuinely you have very large amounts of poverty as people traditionally understand it, right? Kids going hungry, kids not being able to get an education, people dying from very preventable diseases and things like that. And as it happens, that ties into a subject which I probably found the most rewarding and the most interesting to study, which was intellectual property rights. Because, of course, now you have these questions about, people really like talking about what a terrible institution Big Pharma is. And then you've got these questions, right? How do you make it so that medicine gets to the places that need it but can't necessarily afford to pay the Western rates for? Oh, that's really interesting, Frater5. I had no idea. I know my thesis advisor told me that when I was doing my studies, I would want to take a look. I would want to take a look at some of the political science literature, but he says, like, don't spend too much time looking at the methods that they use in the papers, that, economics just has the better set of tools. So it's like, get ideas from poli-sci, but use the econ tools to study it. So right, that makes sense. Well, actually, so, I mean, I've lost the plot a couple of times. I know I've been jumping from topic to topic without finishing them off, but it's actually really funny that we can talk a little bit about the USSR. And I apologize for people who've already got a training in econ. I don't like talking down to people, but I've also tended to notice that when I get on some of these topics and I assume too much, then I have the opposite problem, which is I lose people, and I then become condescending to them because I'm talking over their head. So apologies to fall both ways. But the USSR is actually a really interesting indication, an interesting comparison. So there's this idea that we have in macro called the Golden Rule, and BA and poli-sci know nothing about econ. That's a shame for 8 or 5. I think they're two very complementary disciplines. Although I am an economics major who knows nothing about political science, so these things balance out. But the Golden Rule is basically it is a level of capital in society that will create the optimal level of consumption for the next generation, for lack of a better term. This actually can't let me see if I can come up with a better definition for that, because I know there are some versions which wouldn't have different generations. I don't think I have a textbook in front of me, but I think I know where I can get a slightly better definition from that. I mean, the Golden Rule comes from, the traditional definition of that, which is do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Okay, fair enough. So the one that they talk about here says it's a level of savings that maximizes consumption. Let me just take a look here. Yeah, you know what? I'm willing enough to. This is going to be a little hand wavy, but I'm willing to accept both versions. So basically, the usual model that we will analyze in our econ classes will be one that has capital. So that will be the machines that you use to create things with, and labor. The people who work those machines. There's also one other term that enters that, known as, we usually label it A, but in this case, this is also known as technology. Now, what you want to be careful about when thinking about technology in this sense is I'm not so much talking about computers. You can think of computers as capital, right? So if I were to write, a great novel, and I were to use my laptop to do that. Or, I mean, I could say here, right, like, some of you guys have been extremely kind in giving some donations. So we'll think of this as a small business now, right? I definitely don't have it classified as such, but we can say that there's been some monetary value that has been created out of this enterprise. Now, I can't do this without having a computer and games. And so, in this case, the laptop is the capital. It's not the technology. The technology is better understood through the original Greek word that, I hate invoking the Greek, but I did know the Greek meaning of this word before I took the econ class, and nobody actually bothered to bring it out. But I actually think it brings this idea of technology really into sharp relief, which is you have this idea of techne, which is sort of a way of doing things, or a skill or a craft or something like that. And so technology is not the computer that's bought, but rather the simple idea that where everybody's using typewriters originally, you now say, hey, we can get even more work done by using a computer, because it can save information and you can get them to talk to each other, and they do all of these wonderful things. The shift from not using computers for work to using computers for work is a technological improvement, whereas me upgrading from this laptop, which I normally use for my statistics work, to a proper gaming rig, which has, you know, a high-level NVIDIA card in it or something like that, that would be a capital investment. And that's the technological progress that I'm talking about here would be the better way of doing things, not the actual investment in a piece of equipment. So the solo growth model is sort of the workhorse model that you'll normally work with in econ, and this idea of the golden rule steady state. I am eventually going to get back to the Soviet Union. It's this idea of maximizing consumption. And actually, I'll even talk about one of these little designs that I like, because I think this is an idea that applies well to civilization and things like that. But one of the... It's not really a thought experiment, but I like to think of it this way, is the idea of the social planner, the one that says, you know, if I had a benevolent dictator who could organize all of the resources of society in order to achieve the greatest flourishing for everyone, what would they decide? And usually what the idea for the social planner is you say, okay, I want to maximize utility being a representation of people's preferences. The thing that they prefer the most has the highest utility. And so I say, okay, well, if I give everything that they would like the most, if I maximize the production of things that people want the most, what would they wind up doing? And you solve that problem. You say, it's like, okay, nobody has any agency in this world. They get to just do the things that I want them to. And this is the world that I would organize. And as it turns out, at least in the case of the first welfare theorem, which has a fairly strong assumption that everybody is a price taker. So there's perfectly competitive markets, firms take the price that they're given, consumers take the price that they're given, it's not what happens in the real world, so you need to be careful. Like, these models are abstractions. They're not supposed to be full descriptions about the way that the world works. But it turns out that if you have that strong assumption of perfectly competitive markets, you can do no better than the social planner's solution if you have perfectly competitive markets, also known as a decentralized solution. So the funny thing about this is that my brother's girlfriend is actually also quite left-leaning in her politics. So she's really disappointed to hear that. She's like, you can do no better if you just have, you know, the Republican view of the world, you know, just let the market decide these things. But it's really funny. You look at it, you can look at this from two different ways. I can say it's like there's no better outcome that you can get than to have you know, just the market work in its perfect form. But then you turn around and say, yeah, but you're never going to have a perfectly functioning market like that. So we should have a social planner instead. And then, of course, the free market guy turns around and says, well, yeah, but you're never going to have you're never going to have a perfectly functioning, or you're never going to have a benevolent dictator. There's always going to be some degree of corruption that occurs. So as it turns out, they're both equally unrealistic assumptions. Not one is better than the other. But I always like to have the benevolent dictator idea in the back of my head, the social planner example, as a nice abstraction, just because it's to say, well, what's the best we could hope for? And then how do we compare to that based on whatever analysis that we do? So one of the things that we look for in the case of... in this case here, I am actually going to be saving up a little bit just so I can hit my 50 shrimp boats, and that's just going to increase the rate at which I gain money. So you can do a little bit of saving, but not too much. So the golden rule steady state. This is one where we say, it's like, okay, let's maximize consumption. Oh, benevolent dictator is spherical cow in a vacuum of economics. Let's go for that. If I had better art, I'd actually draw that on my exams, but I don't have any exams anymore. Yes!
So I guess I need to actually talk about the Soviet Union at this point. We have we have this ideal of the steady state, which is to say that, I explained that we can organize society through labor and capital. This is going to be what decides, how much we have to divide amongst ourselves, for lack of a better term. This is what we're going to produce as a society, based on labor, capital, and technology. Thank you, Boole. Just as long as I pass all of them, then I wind up doing grad school. But we'll see. Speaking of which, I'll see if they posted the grades. So, in the solo growth model, the one that we usually look at, you have the question, who owns the capital? And in the end, it's the people own capital, right? We may not necessarily have a very, we may not have a great respect for the, the people we'll call the 1%, but they are members of society. And so presumably their interests are as well represented as anybody else's. And so in the end, the people, the capital is owned by people and it is rented to the firms. Well, who owns the firms? Again, the people own the firms. Usually in the simple versions of the solo growth model, sort of everyone has an equal share, which again is not necessarily a very realistic assumption. You can, of course, take that model and you can change it around. You can say, some fraction of the population has, owns the firms, and you're going to get some different determinations. In the end, you tend to notice that the assumptions that lead to the objections are also the ones that you can change a little bit easier. The question is, the way I'm going to avoid talking about the USSR again, sorry. I will bring it, I will conclude it before I finish talking, I will bring up the Soviet Union before I finish adventure capitalism. I promise you that. So, we, basically the analogy that I drew to my friend in Paris, it mostly because she doesn't always like economic theory. She's a little bit more oriented towards empirical work, so she likes doing the statistics and things like that, which is good. I find it really interesting too. I just like having the division between the two of these things. And I was thinking about going to Paris for studies, and I gave her this example in terms of how we think about theory. I say, if I were to arrive in Paris and I set myself up in the residence and, I'm in Paris, so I want to see all the things that are there, I'm going to say, it's like, okay, well, how do I go from, the PSC from residence to the PSC, to the Louvre, to the Eiffel Tower, right? I want to do all of those things that, a young North American in Paris for the first time would want to try. And it's very reasonable to assume that I would pick up a map and I would want to sort it out. Now, it's a map Google Maps, it could be a paper map, whatever it is. But for this map, I'm going to be making some assumptions. I'm going to be making an extremely unrealistic assumption about Paris, that it is in fact flat, that there are no buildings obstructing my way from the residence to these different buildings. Now, if I'm going to be doing city planning, that's a terrible assumption. But if I'm getting around Paris, that's actually a really good assumption to make. Right, that it's flat, because it gets me to where I need to go. And I think one of the biggest things that I think about in terms of theory is that, the criticism that she raises is a good one, right? Which is to say that, if you have unrealistic assumptions and you get unrealistic conclusions, how much are you really going to get out of all of this? But I also think it's equally important to think that sometimes these simplifying assumptions will give us an understanding of the problem that we're dealing with, that real life problems tend to be more complicated than we can handle just thinking about them in their fullest form. And so if we make some assumptions that take away, let's say, some features that are not necessarily central, we can get to some, we can get a little bit closer to the truth, or to the way that we should be organizing things. So likewise, when we come down to this idea of organizing, how do we organize society? We have this idea of the social planner, we have the idea of perfectly competitive markets. Again, neither of these are particularly realistic assumptions, but do these assumptions at least tell us a little bit about how capitalism works and what we can expect in terms of a conclusion? And so now I will absolutely get to the golden rules savings rate. So when you have capital that's owned by the individuals, the next question you have is, well, how much capital do they have? As we're learning in this game, the adventure capitalist is only ever putting his money into capital. He's not... At no point in this game can you ever actually buy something for yourself. You are the most, caricatured version of what Karl Marx would be writing about, that you exist only to obtain greater means of production. And this game will never even give you an option of getting something as modest as a McDonald's meal, right? The adventure capitalist is somebody who has, in most of these economic models, the only thing that you can derive utility from is consumption. Sometimes you will derive utility from leisure, and maybe the adventure capitalist has a lot of leisure time. But this is a tragic existence of this guy. He literally has absolutely nothing for himself. He's constantly just reinvesting into these. You reset before you can starve to death. Exactly. Yeah. There's nothing for him in this game, which is kind of funny, right? Because money is just a means of getting the things that you want, right? Money is never an end in and of itself. So this would represent a 100% savings rate, right? This person never consumes anything. He will always save his money into some revenue generating enterprise, or into some capital. So that's clearly not that's not something that we want to organize society around. If you derive utility from consumption, you want at least some non-zero amount of consumption. Otherwise you're not maximizing utility, you're not maximizing, well-being, in this case so defined as, as people taking their preference. The thing that, the utility thing isn't that big of a deal to work with. I also missed the opportunity to buy a bank, which is a shame. I'm trying to at least get myself one of everything before I go into the next game. But there's a way of looking at the world, and it's a perfectly respectable and reasonable one, that says that we shouldn't be so focused on material goods, right? We don't want to, we don't want to define ourselves through the things that we own. And I think there's, to me, that makes a lot of sense. So, but with that in mind too, the theory of utility in economics basically says that, you have a set of preferences. Those preferences have a certain set of assumptions behind them, namely that they're complete, and you can basically express whether you prefer one or the other between them. Maybe I won't go into all the assumptions of preferences because it's not that big of a deal. But the idea here is there is still room for things like altruism. You can have a set of preferences that include wanting to make sure that there's a certain level of You want to make sure that there's a certain level of equality in society, and you can build those into people's preferences, and the economic theory will still hold. Listen, understand, the venture capitalist is out there. He can't be bargained with, he can't be reasoned with, and he absolutely will not stop, ever, until he has spent his money. That's a Terminator quote, is that not? It's cute. But yeah, so it's when you have so again, when I talk about preferences and achieving human flourishing, I'm not saying that you can only be happy if you own things. I alone do not possess that much. I mean, I'm doing okay for myself as a North American who is able to attend university. I have absolutely no complaints with my state in life. But with that in mind, if I will compare this to, say, my friends who are working for a living rather than attending a university somewhere, I do not have as many toys as others, and I am not particularly bothered by this fact. So I get that human flourishing is more than just the acquisition of material goods. But utility is supposed to be representative of all of these preferences, including intangibles such as altruism and things like that. So it shouldn't be that controversial of an assumption. Now, the idea here is that unless we are in some very weird set of preferences where literally nobody derives any utility, nobody gets anything out of material goods, including food, clearly we do not want to be spending everything that we organize or everything that we create into capital. We do not want to have a 100% savings rate like the adventure capitalist. So what we do instead, and likewise, if we don't have any capital, then we can't produce anything. Generally the solo growth model determinations, if they have zero capital, then there's no production that gets made, which means, of course, again, there's no consumption, and we wind up in the worst of the situations. So there's some savings rate between 0 and 1, or 0% and 100%, that there's somewhere along that spectrum that allows us to hit the ideal amount. And then you say, well, what is the ideal amount? We haven't really well defined that. And the ideal amount is this idea that I've tried to bring up a couple of times, but I keep getting sidetracked, is this golden rule savings rate. And the golden rule savings rate is basically the one that is going to maximize consumption in the long run. And it's a fairly intuitive result, right? Which is that if you save more than the golden rule amount, then what's going to happen is you're going to reduce your consumption in order to maintain your capital. One of the things that I didn't talk about was the idea of depreciation. That obviously the computer that I buy today is not going to be as good 10 years from now. I'm not going to be able to produce the same things with it. And all capital has a depreciation rate. Maybe not as, these things are a little slippery, right? Because it is absolutely true that, German stuff lasts longer, right? It's really funny that there's some accounting rules which, if you look at, these Swiss and German companies, they've got levels of depreciation that don't actually have very realistic. There's no real comparison to how they actually behave. Generally, the things are much longer lived. And so some investors have actually been able to find a little bit of value in terms of investing in these companies just because people are looking at depreciation on the books, whereas in reality, the capital investments that these companies are making don't necessarily reflect the depreciation rates because the depreciation rates are based on unjustified assumptions. Please don't take investing advice from this channel, though. I will lose you ungodly amounts of money. but you have once you sort of get to this point of deciding the optimal amount, if you save more than this golden rule amount, you are going to be spending more of your consumption on maintaining your capital, and in the end you're not going to be able to consume as much personally as you would want. Likewise, if you don't save enough, then you're sort of leaving money on the table. And this would be there's a few different ways that you can sort of think about how this would work, but like in the end, like let's say that we're living in some post-apocalyptic society where, you know, you can't get anything. Like, everybody's subsistence farming, and everybody's just, you know, everybody has to do everything for themselves. You know, the person who makes a supermarket first in the post-apocalyptic economy is going to do very, very well. Because not everybody wants to spend their time subsistence farming. We want to engage in some trade, right? I would love to get society to a point where somebody can, where I can do a little bit of streaming or, think up some clever economics ideas to, to make a living rather than farming, which I may be not so good at. Some people are good at the world's oldest profession, but not me. So, again, if you think about this idea, the zero savings rate, no capital, at some point, the person who comes up with the first idea for a business is actually going to wind up doing very well for themselves because they can suck at running that business and there's still going to be demand. Whereas, at the far end, once we're using as much capital as we can, as productively as we can, it's actually really hard to come up with a new idea that's going to be able to, is really going to be able to justify the investment. It would be really cool if I could have, something like a tropical island paradise or, a greenhouse in the Northwest Territories, but it's probably a lot cheaper for me to try and grow flowers a little bit closer to the equator rather than trying to build a greenhouse in the Northwest Territories. It's also probably cheaper for me to take the flowers from wherever I grow them closer to the warmer climates and just simply drive them up to the Northwest Territories rather than trying to grow them in that area. That's the sort of thing I'm talking about when I say that it may not necessarily be cost effective. So we sort of I think I screwed something up. Oh well. What's it going to cost me for a manager? Oh, 10 billion. I think I'll probably have to move on to my next game before I get a manager for my bank. But that's fine because I'll have an hour and a half. I'll finish this thought on the Golden Rule steady state, and then we'll move on to our next game because it'll actually tie into this idea of organizing society. So, Lawrence Summers, who, if you watch The Social Network, you will know as the president of Harvard. For the politically inclined amongst you, he's the former Treasury Secretary under the Bill Clinton administration. If you watch the documentary Inside Job, they try to assign the blame for the United States subprime mortgage crisis on him. I'm not entirely sure fairly, but that's a determination for you to make. You'll need to talk about the USSR in the context. Did I say? Oh yeah, I guess I did say what my next game was going to be. Oh, Freighter 5, if you don't know what the game's coming up, it's actually going to be a lot easier than you think. But yeah, Lawrence Summers had this really interesting paper where he compared Western democracies such as the United States to the USSR. This is a Brookings paper, I think, that he wrote. I haven't found the exact one. But he basically noted that it was more likely for Western democracies to save at a rate below the Golden Rule steady state, whereas it would be more common for Bool, it's a secret, but we'll be playing it in a couple minutes. After my break, we'll be switching into it. So hopefully you guys will find it interesting. If not, I can switch it out fairly early. But it'll follow the day's theme of figuring out how the world works. But yeah, so he'd say that Western democracies will save at a rate lower than the Golden Rule steady state. And the reason for that is that you have these short-sighted institutions in place, which are sort of geared toward, like the people who are voting, the next generation is not going to vote in today's election. And so it's easy to implement policies that will lower the savings rate. And what that's going to do is that's going to cause a temporary boost in people's consumption now, right? Because in the end, this is not consumption that's going towards buying capital. This is consumption that I'm eating today. And so because you have this short-term focus, nobody's actually putting that money into the things. And so they're falling short of the Golden Rule steady state. I'd love to try Victoria 2 Bool, but I don't actually have it. And then he says, on the flip side, you've got the Soviet Union. Now, the Soviet Union doesn't necessarily have this problem in terms of, people, you don't have this immediate need to fall to the wishes of the electorate. They can sort of organize, they've got the centrally planned economy the way that they want it to be. And so they don't have they don't have those same pressures that exist in the States. And so what they tend to do is they actually tend to save at a rate above the Golden Rule steady state. And the reason for that is that the Golden Rule steady state will maximize production. Or sorry, it'll maximize utility, but it will not maximize production. What that means is that if you want to have maximum GDP, you don't save at the Golden Rule steady state. You actually save at a rate where basically, if I'm not mistaken, it would probably be at a rate where you are, I think 100% of your production winds up going into depreciation. I need to think about that a little bit more, but that might actually be where it is. But basically Hey, digging straight down. Yeah, we're talking about more economics. This is actually we're going to be wrapping up Adventure Capitalist in a little bit, but I was promising to finish this idea of the Golden Rule study. Oh, yeah, actually, let's finish my pizzerias. That'll be a good way to wrap this up. I'll get these to 100, and I'll probably finish talking about Golden Rule steady state by then. So, in the case of the Soviet Union, what you've got is, this central planner, which is much more concerned with maximum production. And so as a result, they have a Golden Rule they have a savings rate which is above the Golden Rule, because in the end, the institutions don't necessarily care about individual well-being. They care about a production quota. And so what they're doing is they are investing too much in terms of the means of production at the expense of the ability to, use what you're producing out of that. And so, ironically, I guess this is the big reveal at the end of it, is that Adventure Capitalist actually represents a Soviet system much more than the hardcore capitalist system that you would expect, which is this is the figure that is putting absolutely nothing towards his own satisfaction and everything into meeting these production quotas. And so in the end, you can have this, play sad Russian music. Actually, yes, this is what we'll do. I will just abruptly end that. We will continue our discussion about the organizations of political economies and such. I'm going to take my break rather abruptly. We'll just watch the numbers tick by, and I'll leave you with some music as soon as I find it. Assuming YouTube loads. It may not. I don't think it's an option for me to turn the music for this game down, though. Yeah, we'll get by. But yeah, where I was going with that basically was, if we at least believe Lawrence Summers Brookings' paper on these things, because the adventure capitalist saves nothing for himself. Is it the Skinner box or the Edgeworth box? Or are you referring to B.F. Skinner? That's possible, digging straight down. I mean, I believe the paper by Summers is a fairly famous one, and I know the Golden Rule steady state is definitely a pretty central idea in terms of most of the literature of growth. Yeah, okay, fair enough. Ah, gotcha. All right, anyways, in honor of our revelation that Adventure Capitalist is a good model of the Soviet system, I will leave you with a little bit of music as I take my first break for the night. I want to say thank you, everybody, for stopping by. I know it's a little bit of an unconventional stream, but we're going to get a couple of interesting games in just for amusement. See you guys in a couple minutes. Welcome back. So yeah, I agree. That was a really not gonna have no American national anthems here. So yeah, I do realize that was a really abrupt exit, but I was starting to realize I was really starting to exceed my sort of my break time. So I figured I could table anything I was gonna say about the economics to the next game. So I opted for a slightly inglorious exit, but. We'll take a minute to admire the forces of capital at work. And we'll set ourselves up for the new game. OBS doesn't seem to like my... There we go. Excuse us for a minute while we prepare the next game. Oh yes, I almost forgot. This game seems to like to troll me as far as screen sizes are concerned. Yeah, probably. We are indeed Freighter 5. Well done. Get out of here, Putin. I know this sound is a little screwed up. I just need to make sure all of my overlays are still where they need to be. The problem is ever since I added things like the donation and the follow alerts, I need to make sure that things are in a certain order, so... Alright, we should be good. Remember, totalitarianship, dictatorship is always the best option. Yeah, well this is, I mean... I thought this would be... Oh, thank you. I hope this is better. Please let me know if it's not working out. So I thought this would be a great way for us to compare... Actually, let me just make sure I've updated the cast properly. I thought this would be a great way for us to move from adventure capitalist, because it lends itself to sort of discussing some of these issues like ideal savings rates, the influence that people are going to have on, you know, on their political institutions to achieve what may not actually be socially desirable goals. And I think Democracy 3 is such a fantastic game. Again, we talked a little bit about some of the assumptions that are underlying Adventure Capitalist and how ironically it actually is a much better reflection of the Soviet system rather than what we would maybe associate with runaway capitalism. And I think Democracy 3 is a game that I'm so fascinated by because on one hand, people, like when I talk with people about it, they always... I think everybody knows what the developers' political beliefs are in this game. I will go so far. I think Total Biscuit said this, that he's pretty sure that the developer, that Positech thinks conservatives are bad people. And maybe they are. It's not my place to say. But what I love the most about Democracy 3, if you go on the Steam page and you take a look at everybody's evaluations of this game, people on both ends of the political spectrum are going to talk about why this game sucks and how it's pushing the conservative or liberal agenda. You're so ready to spend political capital in order to make minor changes to taxation rates. Yeah. What I love about this game is that it is not pushing a liberal in... By the way, I hate the term liberal as far as referring to the left end of the spectrum because one of the political parties in Canada is the Liberal Party, and they're much more of a centrist party. So I always appreciate that liberal in the United States tends to refer to something different from what it does in Canada. But what I love the most about this game is that I lost a lot when I would try to put what I thought was the ideal society. And what is amazing about this game is how I finally learned that the way you win Democracy 3, the way that you get into another election, the way you maintain office, is you surrender every last principle of good governance. And the way that you win Democracy 3 is you give the people what they want. You become the most craven politician. Yeah, Freighter 5, the way that you get away from being assassinated is to surrender every last ideal that you have. Give the people what they want, become this craven, spineless politician that we like to make fun of on John Oliver, and you win this game. And this is the beauty of Democracy 3. So, this is going to be a little bit different from the last time that I played this. First of all, as far as mods, we've got social engineering, extremism, and clones and drones. I've never played clones and drones, so this is going to be fantastic. I would throw the PC out the window if you had to play this game. Oh dear. I hope you join us digging straight down, but I definitely know that this game is not for everyone. So we may do a third game tonight, but we're gonna do a little bit of Democracy 3 for at least an hour. So just like in real life, yeah, Freighter 5. That's why this game is amazing. So if we take a look at the political compass, you can see where I've driven countries. I've turned the United Kingdom into, Ronald Reagan's, wet dream. Well, okay, maybe not true. Maybe the social elements would be more conservative, but definitely, liberalizing every last, every last element that we could, both socially and financially. Germany, apparently I went a little bit more left, as I did with France. But yeah, you'll notice that even my own political biases are being reflected inside of this game, right? I do tend to be on the little bit more of the American liberal side of the social issues rather than the economic issues. If I want to compare my Steam friends, this is interesting. He used to be pretty socialist and things. This is my brother's girlfriend. Bearwalk and I met at a Dota 2, and this is my brother here. So actually, my brother and I are shockingly close. It's interesting. Alright, chat, I'm gonna let you decide the first playthrough. So I've done a few of these countries before, but I've got... You'll stay and try to keep calm, but just saying talking politics and social issues is hot button issues. If you're quiet for a while, just understand. Yeah, that's totally fine digging straight down. One of the reasons why I did the changes to formats that I did was just as Crusader Kings 2 has Disney Crusader Kings 2 has a very narrow fan base for people who love the game, but also people who will never watch my channel if I'm playing Crusader Kings 2. I definitely reflect that this is going to be the case for some of these other games. So I will say... oh, Jesse Quill, thank you so much for the host. I'll definitely say, I think I will play Democracy 3 at least through for my first, like, until my next break, so that'll mean we've got at least another hour of this game. If it's not for you, I mean, I obviously understand. I'll give you that hour timeline so you can come back and see if the next thing that we play is best. But if you, I mean, again, if it's not bothering you too much, we always love to have you here as well. So, but as always, the first priority should always be your own entertainment, not ours. So, all right, so we've got to vote for Canada from Freighter 5. I will leave this open just to double check with everybody else. So our options right now are UK, France, Germany, United States, Canada, or Australia. I am inclined towards Canada if I don't have any other votes, but I will give a couple more minutes for chat to give me any alternatives. All right, Canada it is. We'll talk a little bit about these. I almost never read this stuff, but let's see what this game has to say. So, Canada became a self-governing dominion in 1867 while retaining its ties to the British Crown. Drive our country into the ground system shock. Oh, I intend to. Became a self-governing dominion in 1867 while retaining ties to the British Crown. The government is a parliamentary democracy and a constitutional monarchy, with Queen Elizabeth II as the head of state. The country is officially bilingual and multicultural. The economy is one of the largest in the world, relying primarily on its rich natural resources. Canada is a member of the G8, NATO, and the Commonwealth of Nations, and the UN. Want to see mob bosses rioting in the streets. Population 33,476,688 based on the 2011 census estimate. Size is 9,984,670 square kilometers. Life expectancy 81.57 years. Gini index 32.1, a measure of inequality. GDP per capita 41,500. Poverty is 9.4%. I'm not quite sure how they measure that. Ethnicity 28% British, 23% French, and 26% mixed. Religion is Christian, with 70.3%. Moose population is estimated at 750,000. Maple syrup consumption is just a little over 1/4 of a kilogram per person. And the Big Mac index is $4.63. So the Big Mac index is a cute little thing that The Economist does, where you will... basically what they say is like there's this idea in international trade of the law of one price, that something like equal goods should not have different prices in different areas. If they did, then you just ship, if let's say a computer mouse was $5 in Canada and $100 in Japan, and there wasn't any foreign exchange, then I would just simply go to Japan and get the $95 difference in terms of the mouse. So the Big Mac index was The Economist saying that the Big Mac is probably the most universal and unchanging thing that you can find across the world, and they try to measure the different, the differences in exchange rates by comparing Big Macs between companies. I'm actually going to go with the default names here, so we'll be the Socialist Coalition for the Conservatives. Compiling misleading statistics, pandering to the media, and scheduling photo opportunities. For this playthrough, I'm gonna go straight. Default settings for this. So sorry, guys. Congratulations on your election victory. Welcome to your new job as Prime Minister. The lives of all 33,476,000 citizens are now in your hands. As you will imagine, there are a number of situations and concerns that you will need to deal with as soon as possible while keeping an eye on the long-term improvement of our citizens' quality of life. Plus, do not forget that you face re-election in 5 years, so you will need to monitor the opinion polls and our party membership. Good luck. So, Sleepbringer, how's it going? We're playing Democracy 3 tonight. Guys, if you... I think we've got a couple of new people in chat, so just bear with me a second here. The Sleepbringer is a member of the team that I'm on, which is Team Panda. He's, I was going to say, especially fantastic because he actually hooked me up with a Heroes of the Storm beta key for a friend of mine who was wanting one. So I owe him for that. But in addition to that, he is a fantastic streamer who I've actually not been able to watch recently. But he did some... I think the last thing I watched of his was he had a bit of a Smash Brothers tournament going on. Really great guy, good member of the team. I don't always get to see as many people on Team Panda as I want to, but Sleepbringer is one of the people who I make sure I actually click on when I see him broadcasting. So if you guys want some Smash and... Well, actually also JRPG. He actually has a pretty good variety in terms of what he casts, but I definitely recommend giving him a follow because he is a solid caster and somebody who I could stand to learn a thing or two about running a good cast from. Alright, so GDP is not as great as it could be, health is medium, education is okay, unemployment is a problem, crime is a huge problem, and poverty is becoming a little bit of an issue. So we're in a bit of a mess. So the thing about Democracy 3 is, I think an interesting feature of this game is how it can convey information to you. Effectively, all of these issues and abilities are feeding into each other. So if I hover my mouse over one of these... been down the last couple of... Okay, that makes sense then. Yeah, good luck on your final Sleepbringer. I'm actually done with mine. I'm waiting on the results, and as long as I haven't failed any classes, I'm going to be on my way to grad school. So, so normally the way this stuff works is if you hover over... Oh! Should be an issue. Is it because I'm streaming it isn't doing this? Normally if you hover over something, it'll actually show you how it's affecting the other issues. But that doesn't seem to be the case right now. GDP because I'm the economist. Well, I mean, there's labor economics, which concerns itself with things like employment and the composition of employment. Okay, so for lack of it's a shame that I can't show you how it works. This game does a really good job of conveying this information to you visually, so you can see the relationships between things. You can see this here as well, so you can see things that are positively affecting GDP and negatively affecting GDP. So in this case, clean energy subsidies, microgeneration grants, all of these different things are positively affecting it. The environment is... Oh, wait a minute. These are effects. So actually, sorry, I think it's the other way around, which is this is what the GDP is causing. So a high GDP is actually causing a drag on the environment. It's been a while since I played this, so I'm probably messing this up. Yeah, this would make sense. So CO2 emissions are going up in response to a more active economy, whereas causes, so in this case, an uncompetitive economy is actually a bit of a drag. Traffic congestion is another one, crime, productivity, immigration, capital gains tax. What I'm mostly focused on right now is looking at my income and expenditure. So I have a small deficit, but nothing too crazy. But I think the best way for me to start with this is to start looking at some of the, I guess some of the issues that I've got in GDP are ones that I can sort of manage, which are things related to, where was it? Traffic congestion. I think traffic congestion is something I can work with the most, especially because what that's going to do is help with the asthma epidemic, which is having a small drag on productivity as well. This should also decrease my healthcare costs. So how do we deal with that? Well, we'll take our road building and we'll reduce them down to essential maintenance. So we're going from, what is it, 3 billion to 750 million. So that's about, I'll say 2.5 billion that I've got to play with in my accounts right now. Now what I'm going to do to make up for that is I'm going to introduce a telecommuting initiative. Again, this is just 400 million right now, so I'll say I've got a $2 billion surplus to deal with in my budget. And I will do a cycling campaign, which should have a long-term effect. That's 100 million. So I've still got about 2 billion that I can play around with. Now, sometimes there's a rail strike, but it looks like we don't have any problems along those lines. Now, I don't have a lot of political capital to work with, so I probably don't have much else that I can do, but let's just double check. Okay, so I have some public services or two. Let's actually do a tourism ad campaign, because that's going to, again, contribute to the economy. Hey, Superior Blaze, how's it going? And I'm actually thinking a business startup campaign might be good too. Actually, no, let's do community policing, because that's both politically popular, but it also it's also going to start dealing with some of these issues. And we do actually have a problem with alcoholism, so I probably don't have enough political capital to introduce that. No, I do. So what I will expect for the next turn is a fairly large surplus, which I'm going to start putting towards some of these other issues that I have. In my early turns, I'm gonna have some advantages as far as like I don't have to worry about election for 5 years, so I'm also going to be able to get some relatively unpopular stuff done. So like right now, the polls don't look good. Our last poll puts us at 28% of the vote in the election. But one of the things that we learned in my province in Canada is that you can actually be really awful over several years, and as long as you handle the year before the election well, you actually tend to turn out well. So looks like my cabinet's where they need to be, which is good. Oh, drat, I had an issue that I needed to solve. Okay, ban same-sex marriage. Until recently, this hasn't been an issue. Marriage has been a straightforward issue and a ceremony reserved for heterosexual couples. But increasingly, more liberal ministers have been carrying out same-sex marriages. Should we ban this at the constitutional level? Ban it? It's crazy to allow this travesty of a religious ceremony to take place. By standing by and doing nothing, we are silently condoning this practice. The church will be outraged if we don't move quickly to put a stop to this. Or we can allow the marriages. There's no good reasons to ban such marriages. It's no business of the state to interfere with the relationships between loving companies regardless of their gender. Placing a ban on these kinds of relationships our citizens conform as an unforgivable intrusion into people's private lives. I will allow the marriages. One of the reasons behind this, actually, which I don't think is reflected in the game... Here's this example I was saying about how the game sort of visually depicts the information that you have. So one of the reasons why I did that was one of the underappreciated features of IBM is the fact that they've actually always had hiring practices that anticipate social legislation in their countries. So one of the reasonings behind that is that I think it was Thomas Watson said that he was always willing to hire people that his competitors wouldn't, for the trivial reasons like because they had a different skin color or something like that. Like if you're a brilliant engineer and you look different from somebody, you're still a brilliant engineer. So IBM was able to hire the brightest and the best because they were able to get over some of their own prejudices. And this is actually something that has borne out in history as well. The Dutch Republic had a tremendous amount of success with its trade, it was also one of those countries that wasn't as heavily affected by some of the fights between Catholics and Protestants. It had more religious tolerance. And of course, Britain became much more successful once William of Orange effectively conquered the country. It's called the Glorious Revolution, but you might also think of it as a conquest. And in this case, again, you have a little bit more of a liberal view of things. Again, liberal in the sense of being a little bit more open-minded and not having some of those divides that had affected other countries. So I would actually argue that is an economic determination as much as the others, which is if you have homosexual couples that do want to be married and that is something that will attract the brightest and best to your country, that's actually a desirable state of affairs. Also, keep in mind that I said that this game is entirely about being a craven tool of the masses, so I will also be making decisions in this game that don't necessarily reflect my political beliefs. So what does it take to introduce a flat income tax? 43, eh? I don't think I'm going to be able to get away with that yet. So I need to come up with some ways of making some money. Oh, I know the first way I'm going to make some money. We'll hammer out the toll roads. Now, I don't expect to be making a ton from this because I want people to stop using roads in the end. But, what else can we do? Oh, and welfare fraud. Hey, Superior Blue, thank you very much for the host. Alright, right now I'm just looking for some easy ways for me to bring in some revenues. I really want to hold off on import tariffs if I can. I might introduce the alcohol awareness campaign. Oh, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to implement a junk food tax at the maximum rate. And then I'm going to introduce a health food subsidy. And what that's going to wind up doing is it's going to, again, save me on, in the long term, that's going to save me on those costs for healthcare. And I will introduce alcohol awareness just because that is a problem, and this is going to take several turns to work. Yes, Sleepbringer, it's I mean, it's a big glorified spreadsheet simulator, but it's a really interesting way of looking at how the world works. I'm playing this with the 3 DLC that it has, so Armed Religious Communities has developed. So, causes high crime, handgun laws, and religious, and its effects are increases to racial tension, violent crime, and a reduction to tourism. So, global economy is doing well. We are actually doing slightly better in the polls. We've got an urgency policy for freedom of information. There have been calls for a law to increase the availability of information held on databases about citizens without their knowledge. These include the records held by private medical companies, insurance companies, and debt collection agencies, as well as information held by government departments. Reject the proposal. Nobody likes the idea of the government holding information about them, but in some circumstances this needs to be done. Government isn't out to spy on everyone, but passing this law will just make it harder for intelligence services to keep a watch on serious criminals and terrorists. It will also affect a large number of businesses who have consumer databases who will be swamped with yet more bureaucracy. Or, propose the Freedom Act. It's essential that we have this law passed, as it is one of the basic checks and balances required for any true free society. The average law-abiding citizen should not be spied on or monitored by multinational corporations with computer databases, and the potential for abuse from government agencies if the citizens cannot view what data is being stored is huge. So, I will propose the Freedom Act. Okay, so we balanced the budget, and what I'm going to do now is something somewhat radical, but I'm actually going to start by reshuffling my cabinet. So I'm going to do a lot of tax and economy, so I'm going to hire these first. Canada doesn't actually have a chancellor, we have a finance minister, but... So in this case I want to have high loyalty, high experience, and wants the job, which is a pretty difficult combination to find, actually. Oh, but here we go. And socialist and liberal. So she's not going to like some of the policies that I implement, but she's going to implement them before she gets mad at me. So, all right. So Minister for Industry. Yep, exactly here. And then I'll just fill in the rest. So foreign policy, conservatives, trade unions. I'm probably not going to get along well with her. So religious and capitalist. Well, I'm not going to be offending the religious that soon, so I guess I can hire him, but this is going to be a problem down the road. Welfare... Guess I'll go for him. Public services. Again, I'm trying to get as much experience and loyalty in my cabinet as I can because I'm actually going to introduce a pretty radical change when I can. Yep, she'll work. Law and order. Law and order is going to be an important one because that's going to be something I tackle relatively soon. And then transport I've more or less dealt with, so this is more maintaining my existing policies. But again, I just want a fairly high degree of political capital. I actually don't seem to have a lot of people with transport. Oh no, he'll do. Oh, armed religious communities is what usually kills you? Yeah, we'll see if I survive. Alright. And I'm actually gonna save my political capital. Hopefully I'll get enough next turn. Religious condemnation. The head of the church has called upon you to resign and told his followers not to vote for you or support your party. You have been described as amoral and spiritually corrupt leader who should not be given support of the church. Poverty's going up. We've got a $6 billion surplus, which is good. We're still maintaining our polls. And so far nobody wants to kill me yet. And no issues to deal with. Okay, 48. So can I implement my horrible tax policy?